Hello, I'm Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad. In this video, I will elaborate on the role played by the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, during the emergency in 1975 and how the RSS exploited exploited Loknayak Jaya Prakash Narayan. In recent years, the RSS members in the BJP have been publicizing that they staunchly opposed the emergency declared by then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in June 1975. However, the truth is much more complex and nuanced. The various organizations of the Sangh Parivar were not unanimous or monolithic in their opposition to the emergency. Many of them were grateful to Indira Gandhi for breaking up Pakistan, and they perceived Sanjay Gandhi as a natural ally of their policies with his anti-communist, pro-business outlook and his advocacy of family planning, which was primarily targeted against Muslims. And the NDA allies Bala Saheb Thackeray and the Shiv Sena enthusiastically supported the emergency, whereas the Akalis staunchly resisted the emergency. And one of the major reasons why Indira Gandhi declared the emergency was that she wanted to destroy the RSS and its student wing, the ABVP, the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, and she threw the cadres of the RSS and the ABVP into jail. But many of the top leaders of the RSS and the Bharatiya Janasangh, the Bharatiya Janasangh is the earlier avatar of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So many of the top leaders of the RSS and the Bharatiya Janasangh sought a compromise with Indira Gandhi, but other RSS and ABVP cadres, they heroically resisted the emergency, either in jail or when they were underground and hiding. And then since 1972, the then Sarsangha Chalak of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, Bala Saheb Devras, Bala Saheb Madhukar Dattatreya Devras, he kept reaching out to Indira Gandhi to work together in the national interest rather than be antagonistic. But a wary Indira Gandhi, she rebuffed all of Devras's overtures because she had inherited her father's deep suspicion of the RSS. And then Bala Saheb Devras sought to build bridges with Sanjay Gandhi, whose anti-communist pro-business views were in sync with those of the RSS. And then how the RSS actually got involved in the JP movement was that in 1974, February 1974, student agitation in Gujarat succeeded in forcing the Congress Chief Minister Chiman Bhai Patel to resign. And inspired by the Gujarat students' success, the student organizations Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad of the Bharatiya Janasangh and the RSS, and the Samajwadi Yuvajavan Sabha of the Samajwadi Party. So these two began an agitation in Bihar against the Congress Chief Minister Abdul Ghafoor. They began this agitation in March 1974, but the ABVP's parent organizations, the RSS and the Bharatiya Janasangh, they were not enthusiastic about joining in this agitation, because strikes and gheraos went against the image of discipline which the Janasangh wanted to project, and strikes hit at the livelihoods of the Janasangh's core voter base of traders and business people. And then the Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti, that was formed in March 1974, and it was led by Lalu Prasad Yadav and Sushil Kumar Modi and Ram Vilas Paswan and JP, Loknayak Jaya Prakash Narayan. He agreed to be associated with this Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti. And then all through the summer of 1974, Indira Gandhi and Jaya Prakash Narayan, they attempted to negotiate a compromise, and Indira Gandhi's negotiators were her principal secretary, Professor P.N. Dhar, and my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, who was her information advisor. And JP's chief negotiator was my maternal uncle, K.S. Radhakrishna. He was head of the Gandhi Peace Foundation, and Radhakrishna had been the main advisor of JP for several decades. And Sanjay Gandhi tried very hard to sabotage these negotiations, and Indira Gandhi actually agreed to all of JP's demands except the dissolution of the Bihar Assembly, and Indira Gandhi's team entreated JP to sort out his differences with Indira Gandhi at the hustings, because elections to the Lok Sabha were due before March 1976. But then what happened is that this well-known journalist Saeed Naqvi, he published a report in the Statesman newspaper giving details of the secret negotiations between my father and my maternal uncle. And this played right into Sanjay Gandhi's hands, because Sanjay Gandhi wanted to sabotage the negotiations between his mother and JP. And so these negotiations had to be very abruptly aborted just as they were on the verge of success. And then what JP did is that, without consulting his own negotiating team, which was K.S. Radhakrishna, who was head of the Gandhi Peace Foundation, and my maternal uncle, and Sugata Das Gupta, who was the head of JP's Gandhian Institute of Studies at Varanasi, and retired Justice V.M. Tarkunde, and Achyut Patwardhan. And Achyut Patwardhan had been a co-founder with Jaya Prakash Narayan of the Congress Socialist Party in 1931. So JP, without consulting his closest advisors, JP very suddenly asked Subramanian Swamy, who was then a Bharatiya Janasangh Rajya Sabha MP from Uttar Pradesh. So JP asked Subramanian Swamy to introduce him to the RSS stalwart Nanaji Deshmukh. And ever since 1972, Subramanian Swamy had been trying to persuade JP to re-enter active politics, to lead the opposition to Indira Gandhi. And actually, ever since they met at Harvard and MIT in the 1960s, Subramanian Swamy, he had exercised a very inexplicable, mesmerizing, hypnotic hold on Jaya Prakash Narayan, who was 3-4 decades older than him. And so Subramanian Swamy, he convened a meeting at the residence of Murli Manohar Joshi, to which Subramanian Swamy invited Jaya Prakash Narayan and Nanaji Deshmukh and K.N. Govindacharya and Kailashpati Mishra. So at this meeting, it was decided that the Bihar student leaders, that is Lalu Prasad Yadav, Sushil Kumar Modi, Ramvilas Paswan, Sharad Yadav, Nitish Kumar, and Ravi Prasad that they would cede the leadership of their agitation to JP and to Nanaji Deshmukh. And Indira Gandhi was absolutely furious and livid, and she vowed that she would no longer negotiate with JP because Indira Gandhi had inherited Jawaharlal Nehru's deep suspicion of the RSS, and it was totally antithetical to her ideals of India as a secular nation. And Jawaharlal Nehru had long equated the RSS with the European Nazis and fascists, and Nehru had warned all the chief ministers as long ago as December 1947 against allowing their state governments to be infiltrated by the RSS. And Indira Gandhi, with her knowledge of European history, was very well aware that the strategy of the RSS, like the strategy of the Nazis and the fascists, was to infiltrate organizations from within by placing its members in the armed forces, police, civil services, judiciary, schools, and colleges. And then JP's own team of K.S. Radhakrishna and Sugata Dasgupta and Achyut Patwardhan and Justice V.M. Tarkunde, as well as JP's protege and political heir Chandrasekhar, they were all kept totally in the dark about JP's very abrupt tying up with the RSS, all in the course of a few days. And they were absolutely aghast at JP's suddenly abandoning his principles of a lifetime, because JP had been second only to Jawaharlal Nehru in vociferously condemning Hindutva and the RSS. And so Professor P.N. Dhar and my father, they reminded JP of his past statements about the RSS, and JP had said, although almost every religious community has its own brand of communalism, Hindu communalism is more pernicious than the others because Hindu communalism can easily masquerade as Indian nationalism and denounce all opposition to it as being anti-national. And again, JP had said, some like the RSS might do it openly by identifying the Indian nation with Hindu Rashtriya. Others might do it more subtly, but in every case, such identification is pregnant with national disintegration because members of other communities can never accept the position of second-class citizens. Such a situation, therefore, has in it the seeds of perpetual conflict and ultimate disruption. And again, JP had said on yet another occasion, those who attempt to equate India with Hindus and Indian history with Hindu history are only detracting from the greatness of India and the glory of Indian history and civilization. Such persons, paradoxical though this may seem, are in reality the enemies of Hinduism itself and the Hindus. Not only do they degrade the noble religion and destroy its Catholicity and spirit of tolerance and harmony, but they also weaken and sunder the fabric of the nation, of which Hindus form such a vast majority. So this is what JP had said about the RSS on numerous occasions over the decades, and Professor P.N. Dhar and my father H.Y. Sharada Prasad, They reminded JP about these past statements of his. And then JP explained to his team, which was headed by K.S. Radhakrishna, that he required a cadre-based organization to take on Indira Gandhi, and the only two cadre-based organizations in the country were the Communists and the RSS. And JP had not forgotten the role of the CPI, the Communist Party of India, during the freedom struggle when the CPI had collaborated with the British. So JP chose to go along with the RSS. And then the final straw for Indira Gandhi was when JP addressed RSS workers, declaring, "If the RSS is fascist, then so am I." And then on the RSS side too, it's Sarsangachalak Bala Sahib Devras and several of the top RSS Pracharaks in Nagpur, as well as many leaders of the Bharatiya Janasangh, such as Atal Bihari Vajpayee. They were not consulted by Nanaji Deshmukh and the others present at this meeting where JP was introduced by Subramaniam Swamy to Nanaji Deshmukh and the others of the RSS. And the Nagpur top brass, led by Sarsangachalak Bala Sahib Devras, as well as several other pracharaks of the RSS, they remain very aloof to JP's Sampurna Kranti Andolan because they were just not consulted at all. But then public opinion turned against Indira Gandhi and in favor of JP's Sampurna Kranti Andolan because of police brutality on JP and Nanaji Deshmukh. And on 4th November 1974, JP and Nanaji Deshmukh led a massive rally in Patna, and the police beat up JP with lathis, breaking his collarbones and elbows and legs. And Nanaji Deshmukh very, very courageously threw himself over JP's unconscious body. And Nanaji Deshmukh himself suffered from grievous injuries, but he saved JP from certain death. And JP had named Nanaji Deshmukh as the General Secretary of his Lok Sangharsh Samiti. And after this brutal attack, JP nominated Nanaji Deshmukh to take over his movement if anything happened to JP. And Nanaji Deshmukh in turn, he nominated Sundar Singh Bhandari and Dattopant Tengadi of the RSS to take over the leadership of the movement if anything happened to him, happened to Nanaji. So Indira Gandhi decided to crack down very hard on the Anand Marg and the ABVP and the RSS, as well as other extremist religious organizations. And she was even more antagonistic to the student wing, the ABVP, than she was to its parent organization, the RSS. And then on 8 January 1975, Siddharth Shankar Ray, he was the Chief Minister of West Bengal and noted barrister, and the Law Minister H.R. Gokhale, and the Congress Party President Devakant Barua, and Rajni Patel. He was the strongman of the Congress Party in Bombay, and Rajni Patel was a leading barrister. So the four of them together planned the emergency, and soon afterwards the private secretary to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, R.K. Dhawan, and the Minister of State for Home, Om Mehta, and the Chief Minister of Haryana, Bansi Lal, they planned the arrests of the members of the ABVP and the RSS and the Anand Marg, and they instructed the chief ministers of several Congress-ruled states to prepare lists of members of these organizations. Then, at the declaration of the emergency on the night of 25th, 26th June 1975, JP was arrested from the home of my maternal uncle, K.S. Radhakrishna, who was the head of the Gandhi Peace Foundation. And then my cousin Chandrahas, he went into an annex and he began telephoning various political leaders that the police had come to arrest JP and that they were likely to be arrested too. And so my cousin Chandrahas, the son of K.S. Radhakrishna, he telephoned Nanaji Deshmukh and Madan Lal Khurana, who were at the RSS headquarters at Rani Jhansi Road in Jhandewala. And so Nanaji Deshmukh and Madan Lal Khurana, they managed to escape 15 minutes before the police arrived there to arrest them. And then a senior police officer called up Subramanian Swamy at 4 a.m. and asked him if he could come over to Swamy's residence straight away to discuss some urgent matters. And Swamy asked him what could be so urgent at 4 a.m. And so, speaking very slowly and emphatically, the police officers said, "If you would happen to not be at home when I come." So Subramanian Swamy quickly understood what this police officer was hinting at and immediately made his escape, and he organized the resistance to the emergency all over India as well as in USA and in UK. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani were arrested in Bengaluru, where they had gone for a parliamentary committee meeting. And Arun Jaitley, who was the head of the ABVP in Delhi, he was among the first to be arrested after he was betrayed by Prabhu Chawla, and Arun Jaitley spent the entire emergency in jail. And ABVP leaders like Balbir Punj and Prabhu Chawla, they quickly pledged allegiance to Indira Gandhi's 20-point program, the infamous Bisutri Arthik Karyakram, and to Sanjay Gandhi's 5-point program in return for staying out of jail. And so the RSS Sarsanga Chalak Bala Sahib Devras, he was arrested at Nagpur on 30th June 1975, and the RSS as an organization was banned on 4th July 1975. And then on 27th June 1975, Indira Gandhi sent cables to several world leaders explaining why she declared the emergency, and she stated in her telegrams, "I am not sure you have been properly informed of what has been happening here. Jaya Prakash Narayan has aligned himself with the RSS, the organization which instigated Mahatma Gandhi's murder and which is fanatically Hindu." So the senior leaders of the RSS were divided about the emergency. Several of them opposed it staunchly. Other RSS leaders apologized to Indira Gandhi and they were released from prison. And several leaders, senior leaders, notably Bala Sahib Devras and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they sought an accommodation, a compromise with Sanjay Gandhi and Indira Gandhi. So the RSS leaders who led the resistance to the emergency were Dattopant Tengadi, Madhavrao Mule, Moropant Pingle, Rajendra Singh, and Bhav Sahib Devras. He was the brother of Bala Sahib Devras. But these zonal leaders of the RSS who were underground, they also authorized Eknath Ramakrishna Ranade to quietly enter into a dialogue with Indira Gandhi. And 3 decades earlier, Eknath Ramakrishna Ranade had conducted secret negotiations with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel after Sardar Patel had banned the RSS following the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had uh, dictated the constitution of the RSS mainly through Eknath Ramakrishna Ranade. And even in the 1960s, Indira Gandhi had helped Ranade, who was being second only to M.S. Golwalkar in the RSS hierarchy. So Indira Gandhi had helped Ranade to build the Vivekananda Kendra over vehement objections from the Congress government of Tamil Nadu and objections from her own cabinet colleagues led by Humayun Kabir. And Indira Gandhi had nominated Ranade to the governing council of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and the two used ICCR as a facade to conduct secret one-on-one negotiations. And my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, was a vice president of the ICCR. But many of the RSS rank and file alleged that Eknath Ramakrishna Ranade was being exploited by Indira Gandhi to sabotage the RSS resistance to the emergency, and in fact Ranade was totally opposed to the ABVP launching the agitation in Bihar in 1974. Okay, and just to digress a little, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stated that Ranade was his guru and his mentor in the RSS. Okay, so from Yerawada jail, the RSS Sarsanga Chalak Bala Sahib Devaras, he wrote numerous times to Indira Gandhi and to the Maharashtra Chief Minister S.P. Chavan, Shankar Rao Chavan, and to Acharya Vinoba Bhave, seeking a compromise. So on 22nd August 1975, Bala Sahib Debris wrote to Indira Gandhi, "I heard your Independence Day address to the nation from Red Fort on the radio with attention. Your address was timely and balanced." But Indira Gandhi did not respond to Bala Sahib Devris, so he wrote to her again on 10th November 1975, congratulating her on the Supreme Court upholding her election. Bala Sahib Devris said, "All the 5 justices of the Supreme Court have declared your election constitutional. Heartiest greetings for it." And then RSS Bala Sahib Devris went on to disassociate the RSS from the JP movement. And he stated further in this letter to Indira Gandhi, which he wrote on 10th November 1975, that the RSS has been named in the context of Jaya Prakash Narayan's movement. The government has also connected the RSS with the Gujarat movement and the Bihar movement without any reason. The Sangh has no relation with these movements. And as I had mentioned earlier, Bala Sahib Devris and the other RSS leaders in Nagpur were not consulted at all when Subramanian Swamy introduced Jaya Prakash Narayan to Nanaji Deshmukh and Murli Manohar Joshi and K.N. Govindacharya and Kailashpati Mishra. And Indira Gandhi did not respond to this letter from Bala Sahib Devris either. And so Devras wrote to Acharya Vinoba Bhave on 12th January 1976, asking Vinoba Bhave to intercede with Indira Gandhi to revoke the ban on the RSS. And Devras wrote to Vinoba Bhave, I beg you to try to remove the wrong assumptions that the PM has about the RSS so that the ban on the RSS is lifted and RSS members are released from jails. We are looking forward to the times when RSS members are able to contribute to the plans of progress under the leadership of our respected PM. But Acharya Vinoba Bhave did not respond to Bala Saheb Devras either. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he had been in ill health and he'd been in and out of hospital, and he had had numerous surgeries. So Vajpayee had spent most of the emergency under parole in his residence after giving an undertaking to Indira Gandhi in September 1975 itself that he would not oppose the emergency, and Vajpayee had even indicated to Indira Gandhi that he was prepared to sever his links with the RSS if that would keep him out of prison. And then in the last week of December 1976, Vajpayee, of his own accord, had visited the notorious Om Mehta. Om Mehta was the Minister of State for Home and the right-hand man of Sanjay Gandhi, and Om Mehta was responsible for several of the excesses of the emergency. And on his return from this meeting with Om Mehta, and Vajpayee went on his own initiative. It is not as if Om Mehta had invited Vajpayee to call on him. So on his return from this meeting with Om Mehta, Vajpayee ordered the student activists of the ABVP to tender an unconditional apology to Indira Gandhi, but the ABVP students, they very steadfastly refused to apologize to Indira Gandhi and said that they would rather prefer to remain in jail rather than apologize to Indira Gandhi. And there is also some evidence that Vajpayee was prepared to reveal the whereabouts of those RSS and Janasangh activists who were still underground, such as Subramanian Swamy and Madhav Rao Mule, and get them arrested by Indira Gandhi and Sanjay Gandhi. And also Rajmata Vijay Raje Scindia of Gwalior, she was detained in a guest house, but after a short while she felt that it was morally wrong for her to be detained in relatively comfortable conditions while her party workers were jailed in harsh conditions. And so Rajmata Scindia requested to be transferred to Tihar jail to be together with her party workers. But again, after a few months of being imprisoned in the very harsh conditions in Tihar jail, Rajmata Vijay Raje Scindia of Gwalior tendered an apology to Indira Gandhi and she was released. And Subramanian Swamy, who is now a Rajya Sabha MP from the BJP. So Subramanian Swamy had written in an article entitled Unlearned Lessons of the Emergency, which was published in the Hindu newspaper on Tuesday, 13th June 2000. So he wrote, during that 1975-1977 period, most of the leaders of the BJP and RSS had betrayed the struggle against the emergency. It is on record in the Maharashtra Assembly proceedings that the then RSS chief Bala Saheb Devras wrote several apology letters to Indira Gandhi from inside the Yarawada jail in Pune, disassociating the RSS from the JP-led movement and offering to work for her infamous 20-point program. She did not reply to any of his letters. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee also wrote apology letters to Indira Gandhi, and she had obliged him. In fact, for most of the 20-month emergency, Mr. Vajpayee was out on parole after having given a written assurance that he would not participate in any programs against the government. The vivid description of other erstwhile Janasangh worthies who chose to walk out of prison on promise of good behavior is given in a book written by the Akali leader, Mr. Surjit Singh Barnala. So this is what Subramanian Swamy had written in the Hindu newspaper in June of 2000. And then after Nanaji Deshmukh fell into a police trap in South Delhi and Dattopant Tengadi too was captured, the morale of the RSS cadres just plummeted. And by September 1976, even those RSS activists who had been staunchly opposing the emergency till then, they were just ready to throw in the towel, because the families of the 40,000 RSS members who had been jailed were in dire straits financially, and over 80 RSS members had died in jail or in police custody. So in November 1976, over 30 leaders of the RSS, led by Madhav Rao Mule and Dattopant Tengadi and Moropant Pingle, they wrote to Indira Gandhi promising support to the emergency if all RSS workers were released from prison. And this document of surrender, to take effect from January 1977, was processed by my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, who was information advisor to the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And this RSS document of surrender, and my father who processed it described it as cringing. So this RSS document of surrender was also confirmed by Subramanian Swamy in his article in the Hindu newspaper on 13th June 2000, where he said, "I must add that not all in the RSS were in the surrender mode. The exceptions were Madhav Rao Mule, Dattopant Tengadi and Moropant Pingle. Mule had taken a tremendous liking to me. He supported me fully while I was abroad and while I was in hiding in India. But a tearful Mule told me in early November 1976 that I had better escape abroad again, since the RSS had finalized the document of surrender to be signed in end January of 1977, and that on Mr. Vajpayee's insistence, I would be sacrificed to appease an irate Indira and a fulminating Sanjay, whose names I had successfully blackened abroad by my campaign. I asked him about the struggle, and he said that in the country, everyone had become reconciled to the 42nd Amendment, and democracy as we had known it was over. Democracy was over for the RSS, but not for all others. A few weeks later, general elections to the Lok Sabha were declared. No one quite understood then what made Indira Gandhi do that, but as a consequence, the RSS luckily did not need to sign the document of surrender. So this is what Subramanian Swamy had written in his article in the Hindu newspaper in June 2000. And I find it significant that both my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, and Subramanian Swamy had independently used the term document of surrender, and not a term like an agreement or an understanding between the RSS and the Indira Gandhi led government. And then again, when the Janata Party government was formed in March 1977, JP realized that he had been inextricably entangled in the tentacles of the RSS, and so JP nominated his protege and his political heir, Chandrasekhar, to be the president of the Janata Party to curb the power of the RSS over the Janata government. And Chandrasekhar detested the RSS. Chandrasekhar was a very staunch socialist. But the consequence of JP getting inextricably entangled with the RSS under the influence of Subramanian Swamy and Ramnath Goenka of the Indian Express is that this once pariah and untouchable organization became part of the political mainstream, and Morarji Desai's Janata government fell apart in July 1979 over the issue of the Janata Party MPs who came from the RSS nursery refusing to sever their links with the RSS. And Subramanian Swamy had written in his article in The Hindu on 13th June 2000, JP's heart had been broken when he saw an India utterly passive to the death of democracy, while those who had earlier egged him on, the RSS, were now repudiating him and offering to work for the nation's tormentors. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who became the foreign minister in Morarji Desai's Janata government in 1977. So Vajpayee quickly neutralized both Nanaji Deshmukh and Subramanian Swamy. And in the January 1980 elections, Nanaji Deshmukh of the RSS endorsed Indira Gandhi. He endorsed the person who threw him into jail. And again, after the assassination of Indira Gandhi in the December 1984 elections, Nanaji Deshmukh endorsed Rajiv Gandhi. And I find it very significant that a Sarsang Chalak of the RSS, K.S. Sudarshan, as well as the VHP Supremo Acharya Giriraj Kishore, they very highly praised Indira Gandhi during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's tenure as Prime Minister. So both K.S. Sudarshan and Acharya Giriraj Kishore described Indira Gandhi as India's best Prime Minister ever. And it is noteworthy, I think, that Subramanian Swamy, who is now a BJP Rajya Sabha MP, had written during the Vajpayee regime, a cadre-based fascist organization is in control of the levers of power. This organization has spawned lumpen front organizations that do not hesitate to kill even defenseless missionaries of religion. Worse, there is every indication that institutions are being undermined by a creeping emergency. The BJP has set into motion the overhaul of the Constitution, not just a mere amendment to it. It has commenced the rewriting of history. Its sister front organizations, such as the VHP and the Bajrang Dal, are already unleashing eerie and shadowy terror at the micro level of society. How can the BJP then speak of defending democracy? So, this is what Subramanian Swamy had written during the tenure of the Vajpayee government, and Subramanian Swamy is now a BJP MP. So, okay. So please subscribe to my channels on YouTube and IGTV, and please follow me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. My Twitter account is @RVP. @RVP is my Twitter account. On my YouTube channel, I will be uploading several more videos about politics, the economy, business and industry, and about technology. So please subscribe to my YouTube and IGTV channels. This is Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad saying goodbye. Have a great day.